Sierra Lane was the embodiment of kindness and intelligence. A young woman raised in a modest but deeply loving family, her mother Clara, a strong and wise woman, had instilled values of resilience and dignity in her daughter from a young age. Living in a quiet mountain town, Sierra had grown up surrounded by simple joys and hard work, her life marked by the unconditional love of her family and their unwavering belief race. A strong woman carries, I promise. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle, a grand celebration that left Sierra both before Paul. Guests arrived in luxurious cars, adorned in the finest formal wear, while the expansive venue dazzled with crystal chandeliers and lavish decorations. Standing, despite his public displays of affection, Dawson seemed distant in their private interactions, as if the new world she was stepping into felt heavier with every passing moment. Her simple upbringing had taught her to value relationships over material wealth, but now she was surrounded by opulence that seemed almost suffocating. Still, she clung to her mother's advice, repeating the words silently in her mind. A strong woman carries her grace wherever she goes. This was her moment, and despite the doubts creeping in, she resolved to embrace her new life with courage and determination. Deep down, she still held on to the belief that love could heal all things, a conviction born of innocence more than experience. Perhaps she had been too quick to assume that kindness alone would be enough to bridge the gap between Hamid. When the festivities ended, Sierra left her family's loving embrace to enter the grand Whitaker mansion. She carried with her a mix of hope and trepidation. This was her new beginning, but little did she know it would soon become the greatest test of her strength and resilience. As the car pulled into the expansive driveway of the Whitaker family mansion, Sierra couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and apprehension. The mansion was nothing short of a palace, its towering gates adorned with intricate gold patterns, the gardens perfectly manicured, and the house itself a testament to immense wealth and power. Despite its grandeur, the cold around the property seemed to carry an unspoken warning. One that Sierra was too polite to voice. When the car came to a stop, Dawson stepped out first, barely glancing in Sierra's direction as he adjusted his cufflinks. A butler opened her door and she stepped out cautiously, clutching the hem of her dress. Her heart raced as she scanned the intimidating facade of her new home. This was nothing like the warm, modest home she had grown up in. Still, she reminded herself of her mother's words, "Carry your grace wherever you go." The mansion's heavy double doors opened, revealing Margaret Whitaker, Dawson's mother, standing tall and imposing. Her sharp features carried no warmth as she sized Sierra up with a single glance. Margaret was followed by Everett Whitaker, Dawson's father, whose stern expression made it clear he was a man used to commanding authority. Behind them stood Elise and Kyle, Dawson's younger siblings, both dressed impeccably and exuding an air of superiority. Margaret stepped forward, her gaze unflinching. "Welcome, Sierra," she said, her tone formal and devoid of emotion. "Remember, being part of this family is a privilege. Do not disappoint us." Sierra forced a polite smile and nodded, her throat tightening under Margaret's piercing gaze. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll do my best." Everett gave a nod, his deep voice rumbling as he added, "We have high standards in this family. I trust you'll live up to them." Sierra lowered her head respectfully. "Yes, sir." As they led her into the house, Elise leaned closer to Kyle, her voice a sharp whisper. "She looks so plain. I wonder what Dawson saw in her." Kyle smirked, his eyes briefly flicking to Sierra. "She'll learn her place soon enough," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Sierra to catch the tail end of his words. Her stomach churned, but she said nothing, choosing instead to focus on the lavish interior of the house. The grandeur of the mansion was overwhelming, with its marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and walls adorned with expensive artwork. Sierra felt small in its vastness, a stark reminder of how different her world was from theirs. Margaret gestured toward the staircase. "Your room is upstairs," she said coolly. "Dinner will be served at 8. Don't be late." "Of course, ma'am." And finding her lacking. Once inside her new room, she closed the door and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The room was beautiful, finished with elegant decor that screamed wealth, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a gilded cage. Sierra sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the events of the day in her mind, the whispers, the cold stares, the veiled warnings. They all painted a picture of a family that had no intention of making her feel welcome. A part of her wanted to speak up, to question their coldness or defend her presence, but years of avoiding conflict had taught her to stay quiet. She had always hoped that if she remained kind and composed, others would eventually come huffy as. Yet she clung to the hope that things might improve, that she could find a way to belong in this new world. Later that evening, as she joined the family for dinner, the atmosphere was no less tense. The conversation at the table revolved around business deals and social events, topics Sierra had little to contribute to. Every now and then, Margaret would glance at her with thinly veiled disapproval, while Elise and Kyle exchanged smirks as if sharing a private joke. Despite the unease gnawing at her, Sierra kept her composure, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "Never let anyone take your grace away." She resolved to remain positive, to adapt to her new life, and to prove that she was strong enough to stand tall in the face of their judgment. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this family, with all its wealth and power, was hiding something far more sinister behind its perfect facade. Sierra sat on the edge of the luxurious bed in her new room, her hands trembling as she adjusted the folds of her dress. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, each sound echoing loudly in her ears. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Tonight was her wedding night, the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Despite the unease she had felt since arriving at the Whitaker mansion, she was determined to make this work. "This is my new beginning," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "I will make it work, no matter how hard it seems." The ornate room, with its rich furnishings and intricate decor, felt suffocating rather than comforting. Sierra tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping into her heart. She wanted to believe that her initial discomfort was just part of adjusting to a new life. But the lingering tension refused to leave her. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door broke the silence. She tensed. "Come in," she said hesitantly, smoothing her dress as the door creaked open. To her surprise, Elise and Kyle stepped into the room, their faces wearing smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Good evening, Sierra," Elise said, her tone overly sweet. "We thought we'd come and welcome you properly." Sierra managed a small smile, though her nerves were now on edge. "Thank you," she replied cautiously. "But it's late, and I was just about to rest." Kyle chuckled, his gaze cold as it lingered on her. "Oh, come on, Sierra. You can't go to bed without a proper welcome from the family. That wouldn't be polite." Before Sierra could respond, the door opened wider, and Margaret and Everett entered the room. Sierra's unease deepened as she saw the stern expressions on their faces. This was no ordinary visit. "Why are you all here?" Sierra asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Where's Dawson?" Margaret's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Dawson has more important things to do," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "We're here to welcome you properly." Sierra stood, her pulse quickening. "Please leave," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "This isn't right." Kyle took a step closer, his smirk widening. "You don't get to decide what's right in this house," he said coldly. "You're part of this family now, and you follow our rules." Sierra's heart raced as she glanced between their faces, searching for any sign of mercy or understanding, but found none. Their eyes bore down on her like predators circling their prey. The air in the room grew heavier, and a deep sense of dread settled in her chest. "This is not how things should be," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Please let me go." Margaret stepped forward, her expression hardening. "You're in no position to make demands, Sierra," she said, her tongue sharp and cutting. "You do as you're told." Sierra backed away, her breathing quick and shallow. "I don't understand what you want from me," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "This isn't right." Everett's deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You will learn to stop questioning this family," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Disobedience will not be tolerated." Before Sierra could react, the situation escalated. Elise and Kyle stepped forward, their movements calculated and menacing. Sierra's instincts screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Her back hit the wall as they closed in on her, their shadows looming large and oppressive. Please don't do this, Sierra pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. I haven't done anything to deserve this. Margaret's laughter was cold and cruel. This is your place now, Sierra, she said, her voice devoid of empathy. You'd do well to remember that. The room seemed to close in around her as the horrific reality of her situation unfolded. Betrayed and surrounded, Sierra's cries for help went unanswered. The very people who were supposed to be her family, her protectors, became her worst nightmare. The night dragged on, each moment filled with fear, pain, and helplessness. Sierra's world shattered in that room, leaving her broken and betrayed by the family she had just married into. The echoes of their cruelty and her anguish would haunt her for the rest of her life as the door finally closed behind them. Sierra lay curled up on the floor, trembling and sobbing. The once beautiful room now felt like a prison, its opulence mocking her shattered innocence. In the depths of her pain, she clung to one desperate thought: I must survive. No matter what, I will find a way to fight back. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Whitaker mansion, but for Sierra, the new day felt heavy and suffocating. She sat on the edge of her bed, her body still trembling from the horrors of the previous night. Her once bright eyes were now filled with pain and confusion, and her mind raced with unanswered questions. How could they do this to her? How could Dawson, the man she had married, leave her alone with such monsters? Determined to get answers, Sierra left her room and went in search of her husband. She found him in the grand dining room, seated at the long table with a cup of coffee in hand, scrolling casually through his phone as though nothing had happened. The sight of his nonchalant demeanor ignited a fire of anger and betrayal within her. "Dawson," she said, her voice trembling but firm as she stepped into the room. He looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Good morning," he said flatly, showing no sign of concern. Sierra clenched her fists, struggling to keep her composure. "How could you leave me with them?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Do you even care about what happened to me?" Dawson sighed and set his coffee cup down, his expression one of irritation rather than guilt. "Sierra, stop overreacting," he said dismissively. "This is how things are in this family. You'll adjust." "Adjust," she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes as she took a step closer. "Do you even hear yourself? They hurt me, Dawson. Your family hurts me, and you're telling me to adjust?" Dawson leaned back in his chair, shrugging as though her words meant nothing. "Sierra, you're making a big deal out of nothing. My family has their ways, and if you want to survive here, you have to learn to deal with it. That's just how it is." Sierra stared at him in shock, her heart shattering all over again. The man she had trusted, the man she had hoped would stand by her, was not only indifferent, but complicit in her suffering. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she realized how deeply she had been betrayed. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the dining room, her mind swirling with thoughts. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run back to her mother's arms and tell her everything. But as much as she longed for her mother's comfort, fear held her back. She knew the power the Whitaker family wielded, and how easily they could crush her and her loved ones if she dared to speak out. Sierra sat in her room, staring out the window as tears streamed down her face. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. Clara, who had always been her source of strength and guidance. How could she tell her mother what had happened without breaking her heart? And yet, how could she stay silent and let this family's cruelty go unchecked? How do I tell Mama about this without breaking her heart? But how do I stay silent, she thought, her chest tightening with the weight of her dilemma. The day dragged on, each moment more suffocating than the last. Sierra avoided the Whitaker family, unable to bear their presence, and spent most of her time locked in her room. Every sound in the hallway made her flinch, her body tense with fear and anger. She felt trapped, not just in the mansion, but in a web of power and silence that seemed impossible to escape. As night fell, Sierra sat by the window, staring at the moonlit sky and clutching the locket her mother had given her on her wedding day. The familiar words echoed in her mind, "Carry your grace wherever you go." But how could she carry grace in a place that sought to strip her of her dignity and humanity? For the first time, a new thought began to take shape in her mind. If she couldn't confide in her mother, Yet perhaps there was someone else who could help her. Someone outside the Whitaker family's grasp. The idea gave her a glimmer of hope, a faint light in the darkness that surrounded her. I will find a way out of this, she thought, her tears drying as a spark of determination lit within her. I won't let them break me. Sierra paced nervously in her room, her heart pounding as she clutched her phone. She had debated all night about what to do, and now, in the quiet of the early morning, she knew she couldn't bear this burden alone. Her mother couldn't know, her heart would break under the weight of such a revelation. But there was someone she could trust, someone who had always been there for her, even if life had taken them in different directions. She dialed the number with trembling hands. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered, warm and full of concern. Sierra, it's been so long. How are you? Sierra felt tears spring to her eyes at the sound of Marcus's voice. He had been her closest friend growing up, a brother in every way that mattered. She hadn't spoken to him in months, but she knew she could trust him. Marcus, she began, her voice breaking. I need your help. The concern in his tone deepened. What's wrong, Sierra? Are you okay? Sierra hesitated, unsure of how to even begin explaining the horrors she had endured. Taking a deep breath, she told him everything, the nightmare of her wedding night, Dawson's indifference, and the oppressive cruelty of the Whitaker family. By the time she finished, she was sobbing, the weight of her words finally lifting off her chest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Marcus spoke, his voice filled with controlled anger. These people think their wealth makes them untouchable, Marcus said, his words sharp and deliberate. But we'll make sure they face justice, Sierra. I promise you that. Sierra wiped her tears, her voice trembling. I'm scared, Marcus. What if they destroy my family? What if they come after Mama? You're not alone in this, Marcus reassured her. Trust me, we'll get through this together. They won't harm you or your family. I'll make sure of it. For the first time in days, Sierra felt a glimmer of hope. Marcus's unwavering support gave her the strength to face what was ahead. They agreed to meet in secret to discuss their plan, knowing the Whitakers' reach extended far beyond the walls of their mansion. Over the next few weeks, Sierra began gathering evidence with Marcus's guidance. She carried a small recorder hidden in her clothing, capturing the veiled threats and insults from Margaret and Everett. She documented every bruise, every insult, and every moment of torment. During one particularly tense conversation, she overheard Kyle boasting to Elise about how no one would believe a simple girl like her. Sierra pressed the record button discreetly, her hands trembling as their cruel laughter echoed in her ears. Marcus also helped her secure medical reports, detailing the physical harm she had endured. Sierra had initially been hesitant to seek medical help, afraid of drawing attention to herself, but Marcus insisted. This is proof, he had told her. They can't deny what's written in black and white. Despite the constant fear of being discovered, Sierra's determination grew stronger with each piece of evidence she collected. Sierra had initially been hesitant to seek medical help, afraid of drawing attention to herself, but Marcus insisted. This is proof, he had told her. They can't deny what's written in black and white. Despite the constant fear of being discovered, Sierra's determination grew stronger with each piece of evidence she collected. But that determination was not without its cracks. Some nights she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering if it would ever be enough. The Whitakers were powerful. What if all her effort led to nothing? Doubt crept in quietly, a voice that whispered she was too small to win. Yet each morning, she rose and kept going, unwilling to let fear silence her again. Late at night, she would sit in her room and review the recordings, the voices of her abusers fueling her resolve. The scars on her body were reminders of her pain, but they also reminded her of why she needed to fight. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Margaret, where she had been called a disgrace, Sierra recorded her own voice speaking into the device with quiet determination. They will not break me, she said, her voice steady. I will not let them win. With Marcus's help, Sierra began building a case against the Whitaker family. They contacted a lawyer, a kind woman named Danica, who was horrified by Sierra's story and agreed to help them. The Whitakers may be powerful, Danica said, her voice firm, but no one is above the law. We'll make sure justice is served." As Sierra sat across from Marcus and Danica, her evidence spread out before them. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a team of people who believed in her, who were willing to stand by her side and fight for her. The Whitakers thought they were untouchable, but Sierra was determined to prove them wrong. With every step forward, her fear began to give way to courage. "This is my fight now," she thought, "and I won't back down." The grand ballroom of the Whitaker family's estate was filled with influential guests, all dressed in their finest attire. It was a public charity event hosted by the family to maintain their reputation as philanthropists and leaders in society. The glittering chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room. But for Sierra, the light only highlighted the darkness that had plagued her life since she entered this family. She stood in the corner, her heart pounding as she scanned the room. Tonight was the night. With Marcus by her side and her evidence securely in hand, she was ready to confront the people who had tormented her. This was not just her fight anymore. It was for the countless others who might have suffered in silence. Marcus leaned toward her, his voice low but firm. "You've got this, Sierra. Remember, they don't own the truth. You do." Sierra nodded, summoning every ounce of courage she had. She stepped forward, cutting through the crowd until she stood at the center of the room. The chatter among the guests quieted as they turned to look at her, curiosity flickering in their eyes. "Excuse me," Sierra began, her voice steady but loud enough to command attention. "I have something to say." Everett and Margaret, standing near the podium, froze. Their faces betrayed a flicker of unease as they saw her. "Sierra," Everett said, his tone warning, "this is not the time or place." "No," Sierra interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "It's the perfect time and place." The guests murmured, sensing the tension in the air. Sierra took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly, but she refused to let her fear show. She locked eyes with Everett and Margaret, her gaze unwavering. "You have tormented me, and others, because you think your wealth protects you," she said, her voice ringing out with conviction. "Not anymore." Margaret's face darkened, and Everett's voice thundered across the room. "How dare you accuse us? You're nothing but an ungrateful girl." Sierra's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Ungrateful? For what? For the abuse and pain you've caused me? You'll answer for this." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone present. Before Everett could respond, Marcus stepped forward, holding up a stack of documents and a recorder. "We have evidence," he announced, his voice clear and authoritative. "Recordings of their threats, medical reports of Sierra's injuries, and proof of their actions. You can deny it all you want, but the truth is right here." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Marcus played one of the recordings. The voices of Kyle and Elise mocking Sierra's pain echoed through the room, followed by Margaret's cold, cutting remarks. The once supportive murmurs around the Whitakers shifted into whispers of disbelief and outrage. Everett's confident demeanor faded, his face growing pale. This is a lie," Everett stammered, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Margaret clutched her purse, her lips trembling as she tried to compose herself. "You don't understand," she began, but the evidence was undeniable. Sierra took a step closer to them, her voice steady and unyielding. "You've spent your lives hiding behind your wealth and power, thinking it makes you untouchable. But tonight, the truth comes out. You can no longer silence me." The room erupted in murmurs of shock and anger. Guests who had once admired the Whitakers now looked at them with disdain. A few people even began recording the scene on their phones, capturing every moment of the family's unraveling. As the tension reached its peak, a team of police officers entered the room, alerted by Marcus and the lawyer Danica. They approached the Whitakers, their faces grim. "Everett Whitaker, Margaret Whitaker, you are under arrest for multiple charges, including assault and intimidation." Margaret wept as the officers led her away, while Everett struggled against their grip, shouting, "This is a mistake. We're innocent." Sierra watched them go, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. She turned to Marcus, who gave her a reassuring nod. The fight wasn't over, but justice had finally begun. For the first time, Sierra felt the weight of her pain begin to lift, replaced by the strength of her courage. The courtroom was packed as the verdict was read, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone present. Everett, Margaret, Elise, and Kyle Whitaker were found guilty of multiple charges, including assault, intimidation, and conspiracy. The once powerful family who had lorded their wealth and status over others now faced years behind bars. The gavel struck with a resounding finality, and the murmurs of justice filled the room. Sierra sat quietly in the back, her hands clasped tightly together. She felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. It had been a long and grueling fight, but it was finally over. As the Whitakers were escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, they avoided her gaze, their expressions a mix of anger and defeat. Sierra didn't need to say a word. Her silence spoke volumes. They had lost, and she had won. Outside the courthouse, Sierra was greeted by her mother, Clara. Clara embraced her tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. "Sierra, your strength has saved not just yourself but so many others who might have suffered in silence," she said, her voice trembling with pride. Sierra leaned into her mother's comforting embrace. "Mama," she replied softly, "I couldn't let them win. They needed to be stopped." Clara pulled back slowly, placing her hands on Sierra's cheeks. "You've shown courage beyond anything I could have imagined," Clara said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've made me so proud." Marcus stepped forward, his warm smile reflecting his deep respect for Sierra. "You've inspired more people than you realize, Sierra," he said. "Your bravery will echo far beyond this case." Word of Sierra's triumph spread quickly, and soon other victims of abuse began coming forward with their own stories. Her courage became a beacon of hope for those who had once felt voiceless. Women from all walks of life reached out to her, thanking her for her strength and for showing them that it was possible to fight back, no matter how powerful the abuser. As the weeks turned into months, Sierra began to rebuild her life. With the unwavering support of her mother and Marcus, she found solace in small moments, walking through her hometown, reconnecting with old friends, and finding joy in the simple pleasures she had once taken for granted. Sierra knew the scars of her ordeal would never fully fade, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they became symbols of her resilience. She was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a voice for change. Her story proved that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail. Months after the trial, Sierra's stand became a catalyst for change. Her courage to stand up against the powerful Whitaker family inspired many to break their silence. She was no longer just Sierra, the young woman from a humble town. She had become a symbol of resilience and justice. Invited to speak at public forums, schools, and women's organizations, Sierra used her platform to shed light on the realities of abuse. Her story resonated with countless survivors who had felt powerless for too long. She urged them to reclaim their voices and fight back against the systems that allowed such injustices to thrive. During one televised interview, the host asked Sierra what motivated her to take on such a daunting battle. She took a deep breath, her expression calm but resolute. "Silence empowers abusers," she said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "We need to speak up, not just for ourselves, but for those who cannot. Change starts when we refuse to let fear control us." "I fought for justice not only for me, but for everyone who has suffered in silence." The interview ended with a standing ovation, her words echoing in the hearts of many. Sierra's story wasn't just about pain, it was about triumph, proving that justice and resilience could prevail against all odds.